Friends, I have a confession to make. I am a rule follower. I get anxious when rules are broken, even arbitrary ones, because that rule was put in there for a reason. If I'm over at your house and we're playing some board game or card game, and you introduce some sort of special rule on me that's unique to your house, I have to check that part of me that gets all bubbly up and anxious that you've changed something, you know? Well, are we allowed to do that? Well, yeah, of course. But I have to allow myself to allow us to do that. You know what I mean? I'm one of those folks that teachers really enjoyed having in the classroom because I did what I was told. You know? Sometimes to the chagrin of my fellow students. I'm not one of those people who goes seeking out that adrenaline rush of breaking a rule. I mean, yeah, I've done it, but I don't seek it out. Stephanie, my spouse, sometimes she likes to throw a hand grenade into propriety, you know? She just wants to mix things up and just be a little rebellious. Not so much that people get hurt or anything, just enough to, I think, at this point in our relationship to make me bristle a little bit, you know? But when we were dating, it was something that I first noticed with her because she would wear 2 different colored socks. Something that she now consistently does. Something that I care much less about. But it took a long time for me to get used to this myself. And now I do it because our house flooded and I'm, I need clothes. I've come to terms with this being part of my own neurological stew, you know? It's part of my anxiety, people pleaser self, the rule-following aspects, you know? I don't want to make a hassle. I don't want to make a fuss. I don't want people to be mad at me. But throughout my life, I've sought to follow a rule that puts me at conflict with other rules from time to time. The commandments to love God and others as we love ourselves. That puts me at odds with other rules from time to time. Stupid rules. Now, first of all, before I move on, who else relates to this rule followerness? You know, I want to find out now before we go to coffee. All right. Who else is like a Stephanie, you know? Let's put on 2 different colored socks. Yeah, you're both at the same time. Jan, I'm not at all surprised to see that hand go up. You know, you have an HOA and they're like, hey, we don't want yard signs. Jan's putting that yard sign in. Only at nighttime. I don't know how that sign got here, HOA. Yeah. So this came up for me as I was reading our story today. We're back in the book of Acts. We had a 2-week break. You got to enjoy something from Mo and something from Calicason and iChirp. Now we're in Acts. We are just a few weeks after Pentecost, which puts us just a few months after Easter. So Good Friday and Easter, these are still recent memories for the early church. When we last were looking at the life of the early church in Jerusalem with the apostles, they were hunkering down in homes and they were praying for boldness because 2 of their leaders had been arrested and issued a gag order saying, hey, we don't want you, these are the religious leaders speaking in Jerusalem, we don't want you going out into the city talking about Jesus or healing in the name of Jesus. And the church, they get together, they pray for boldness. They're reminded of what Peter and John said to the Sanhedrin, the council of religious leaders. You decide for yourselves whether it's right for us to listen to God or to humans. Implying, you could release us, but we're still going to keep doing what we were doing. But they still have to get together with their community and talk about it and pray for boldness. And that boldness results in them doubling down on their commitment to share goods with one another, to share their resources, to sell their property if they are lucky enough to have property, and pool their money so that those who don't have enough can eat. What good is prayer if it doesn't bubble over into action? What is faith if it doesn't manifest in works, James would say. And so, at this point in our story, they go back out into the streets. They've not stopped. They go over to the temple, the most public building in Jerusalem, and the apostles are just hanging out. And Solomon's portico, which is just a nice way of saying, hey, we've got a fancy porch. And folks would just hang out there. They're just hanging out there. It's a common area. And sometimes they're preaching, and they're teaching about the stuff that Jesus taught them. And sometimes they're just there, hanging out. And what do the folks do around them? They bring their sick loved ones over to be healed. And apparently, the Spirit of God is so palpable, so powerful, that the Spirit is just pumping out heaping helpings of healing. And so much so that Peter's very shadow heals folks. Now, in this story, we don't see anybody making a confession of faith. There's no requirement to pray, to convert, to start going to church. The folks who came for healing just get healed. Healthcare just happens. I find that instructive. And also I find some tension in that, because the rules say, well, you got to earn that. Our society keeps telling us, well, that's not a right. That's something you gotta get through your job, right? I grew up in churches that would say, well, you know, people need to earn everything they get, even health care. And yet in this story, people are just healed without condition. Now, this gets the attention of the people around them. Our text very interestingly says that they have garnished this beautiful reputation with the community, right? And none would dare join them. And then the next verse says, and they grew every day, which, okay, all right. I don't know if this is just lost in translation and this would have made more sense to the original listeners, but those two things don't go together. Maybe this is a later insertion by, people who transcribe the texts. I don't know. Maybe we don't need to reconcile those things. I just chalk it up at this point, for the sake of understanding the story, that there's hesitation here, and yet people are drawn in. And I also find that to be beautiful, because that's also true in my lived experience, and it may be true for you. We hesitate, and we are drawn. And wouldn't you know it, doing healings in Solomon's portico, in the busiest, most public place in Jerusalem, catches the attention of the people who run the temple, the Sadducees, the priestly class. And our text tells us that they were jealous. I also find that to be telling, that sometimes when we see good folks doing good things, sometimes we have this tendency within us not to celebrate that, but to be jealous. I want to say that's just true of the folks that I disagree with ideologically. But I don't know if that's always the case. Because I've had moments when I've seen folks doing beautiful things, and I felt real petty about it. Maybe you have too. I don't know. Regardless, these are the same leaders who told Peter and John and the apostles to shut up, to stop talking about Jesus. Don't you dare say that man's name. Just stop it. You see, there's power in names. Some of the commentaries I've read say this is an ancient thing, that there's power in names. And yeah, that's true. Because they had this sense that when you're bringing the name of somebody with you, you're bringing that person with you or that deity with you. To pray in the name of Jesus is to manifest, in a sense, the presence of Jesus. We remember Jesus. We put Jesus back together. The literal meaning of remember, right? But that's still true for us today, too. When somebody is unfairly killed by the police, we have this default of anonymity. And yet organizers often remind us to say their name. Because the name reminds us this was a person. This is not a number. George Floyd was a person with a life, a story that was brought to an abrupt and unfair end. George Floyd was loved by his family, by the mother he cried out to, right? And when we remember the name George Floyd, we remember all of those other surrounding details as well. So the disciples, they can't be silent. They prayed for boldness. They're bringing boldness with us. They're going to keep talking about Jesus. His life, his teachings that made such a serious imprint on them that it changed their lives, right? They want to share this with other folks. But they're also healing people. And for their trouble, they're arrested. They're put in the public prison, which is interesting that the religious leaders have their own prison. Some of our religious leaders wish they had the same. And wouldn't you know it, as is wont to happen, an angel comes over and opens the door and says, "All right, everybody out. Just don't shut up about the Jesus stuff, and we want you to keep healing folks. Get back out there." I think this might have caused like a moment's hesitation for me. You want me to go out there and do the thing I was just arrested for? Well, I mean, I'm probably going to be arrested again. And yet, they do it. And this time, we see that these Sadducees and some of the Pharisees, these are two different groups of religious leaders who don't always get along very well, but they make up the Sanhedrin, the religious council. Their ears pick up and their backs prickle when they hear that the apostles are indicting them for the spilling of this man's blood. That's a quote. Again, they don't say Jesus. They are holding us accountable for killing Jesus. And so, yes, they are arrested again. This time, it's because the religious leaders don't like that they are being brought up in relationship to this unfair state execution. Our leaders still hate that. There's a world of difference between now and 2,000 years ago, and yet some things just stay the same. Our leaders don't want to be held accountable. It is dangerous to be held accountable. These folks have a good reputation because the people are building this relationship, not just of trust and not just of like attention, listening to what they have to say, but they're building a relationship of even healing, where their loved ones are given a new chance at life. And so now the religious leaders are squabbling amongst themselves. And they're trying to decide, well, what do we do? You know, we can't, like, just let this happen. But we also can't hold them because everybody seems to love them right now. What do we do? And eventually one of them says, you know what? I think what we need to do is just let them go. And whatever happens, happens. We've seen rebel movements rise up before, and every single one of them squashed. So that's probably going to be what happens. This movement's going to also be squashed. But if God's on their side, it's going to continue on. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this logic because there's lots of groups these days that I, anyway, don't think God's on the side of, who have not been squashed. But that's what the council decides. This is the most, this suits their purposes the best. It's the best solution they can reach, but not without a good show of force. I mean, if you're going to be merciful and gracious, you don't want the people thinking that they can just do whatever they want. No. You got to give a good squashing when you can. You know, yeah, God's going to maybe empower them, or maybe they'll be squashed by Rome. But let's be sure to give these 12 guys a good flogging first. You know? Flogging is when somebody's back is broken with whips. And so here you have the disciples. Sorry, guys. You have the disciples who all turned tail when Jesus was arrested and died. And they are proclaiming praise to God because they feel that they are on the right side this time around. They view this as a show of solidarity with the Jesus that they regretted abandoning earlier. I find that baffling, but also kind of beautiful, but mostly baffling. I've had moments like that in my life, I think, when maybe I view suffering in the present moment as connected to something in the past. But it does demonstrate something that I think we take too lightly. And that is that when we show solidarity, when we are standing in solidarity with others, it comes with risks. What happens to them happens to us. And we have to go into that knowing ahead of time that we may also be flogged. Is it worth it? Is it worth being flogged to stand with Jesus? Is it worth being flogged to stand with our neighbors who need healing? Is it worth being flogged to stand with our neighbors in the Philippines or in Palestine or next door? I can't answer that for you. This story perplexes me, and it inspires me, and it reminds me of another story. So, 5 years ago and 10 days, Representative John Lewis died. I was at General Synod for the 5th anniversary of his death, and we remembered him, and we celebrated his life, and some of us knew him, not me. And we remembered that sometimes we have to get into trouble. Even those of us who just want to follow the rules, and we don't want people to be angry with us, sometimes it's necessary to get into good trouble. 40 plus years ago, John Lewis was marching with Martin Luther King Jr. and 600 other people across a bridge. This is a famous incident in his life. Some of you know where this is going. And they shut down the bridge. Always a popular technique when it comes to nonviolent protest. And John Lewis expected to get arrested. He had already girded himself for that. Instead, he was beaten so severely he almost died on that bridge. It created permanent scarring on his face that when you see his picture, you recognize. It was a traumatic incident. And until the day he died, he insisted that he would do it again. The result of that and so many other folks being willing to go out and protest and stand up for civil rights was the eventual passing of civil rights legislation. Sometimes we have to get into trouble. Good trouble. Necessary trouble, as John Lewis was wont to say. He spoke near the end of his life in an interview, and he said, "We've got to be willing to get into good trouble for the beloved community." The beloved community was Reverend Dr. King's favorite term for what gospel writers often call the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. And it's one of my favorite terms for it as well. It's God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven. It's God's will of love and justice and peace manifesting in our midst. This story and John Lewis's story inspire me. And they remind me, the good rule follower that I am, the little child who doesn't want anybody to get mad at me, that we have to be willing to not just count the potential costs of our actions, but to get into trouble and stand with those who are already risking everything. I don't like conflict, but working for peace and healing has always led to conflict. I'm a people pleaser, and challenging inequity makes people angry. We love Martin Luther King Jr. today, and when he lived, he was the most hated man in America. Doing the work that love demands has in the past and will in the future get me into trouble. And I don't take that lightly, I don't seek it out. But lucky for me, I have good company. I've got you, church, my fellow good troublemakers. I've got our neighbors in the beloved community. We've got conspirators in this business of love and healing. So I'm going to keep showing up when I can, how I can, and I know you will too. You, like me, are drawn by the spirits, I believe, for the work of love. So I'm going to push you to keep showing up, to keep advocating for human rights, for shelter, for peace, for getting into trouble, Rita. We're going to keep getting into trouble. But this part's important. Just please get into the trouble that love demands and not hate. Get into trouble that peace demands, and not war or violence. Get into trouble that healing demands, and not harm. Get into trouble that good demands, and not evil. This world's got enough rebels turned tyrants. We don't need to join them. We need to join love. May we continue on with Christ and the beloved community as cultivators of life and love.